Hey guys, what's up? Unrested back again, and today I'm talking about people who get sick of living in Japan but don't leave Japan, which is kind of a weird situation. You might wonder why it happens, but that's what we're going to talk about today. I was reminded when I watched a person at Costco the other day complain about people making a line to get samples of some kind of sample food that they put out. You always have sample foods put out so that people can try it at different, grocery stores or Costco, whatever. In Japan, that's a big, popular thing to do, to hand out samples. And I remember one time being at Costco, I'm by myself. I'm just doing my own shopping. I'm not out there to communicate with anybody or talk to anybody. And a sample shop starts to show up, like a little sample stand starts to get set up, and already a ton of Japanese people start crowding around it because Japanese people love free samples. I don't see a problem with that. That's fine. They start to crowd around the setup, and this other guy, I've never seen him before in my life. He probably was like in his early 50s or something like that. Probably had lived in Japan a super long time. He walks up to me, he bends down, and he kind of like in a low voice tells me in my ear, he says, "Look at them. It could be free shit and they'd still swarm to it like flies." And he just walked off with like this angry look on his face, and I just thought, what the hell? Like, are you that angry at people just for lining up for free samples? But this is a guy who has probably lived in Japan a very long time, and you can either learn to live with a lot of the things the Japanese people do, or I guess, like this guy, learn to hate everything around you that makes up Japan, yet continue to live in it because probably so much of your life is tied to Japan. There's no way to leave at this point. And I'm going to just talk about a couple situations where this kind of happens. I think one that maybe some people in the JVlog community could talk about was there used to be a JVlogger, and I'm not talking about Ryan Boundless. That's another guy who hated living in Japan, but he left. He's not one of these people. He complained about Japan and left. Milk Juice Jam. I don't know if she's still making videos these days or if she's any part of YouTube whatsoever. I did have her added as a friend on Facebook for a while, and I think Victor felt the same way about this. We would see her post almost every day another complaint about living in Japan. It would always be about something going on just in her daily trips throughout Japan, using the train, taking a taxi, riding your bike. Complaints about Japanese people stare at her. Um, they'd like tap her and ask her for directions or ask her if she was lost. Try to teach her something she already knew, like here's how you hold chopsticks, here's how you say this Japanese word. Um, or she would run into the problem where she'd say something in Japanese and they wouldn't understand it at all. And I've encountered these problems before. I don't know if I'd call them problems. I would more so call it sometimes naivety amongst the Japanese. Like when a Japanese person is like surprised I know how to use chopsticks, it's kind of like, well, I mean, America's pretty international. Most of us have eaten at an Asian restaurant that had chopsticks, so we did learn before we came to Japan. There are some older generational people in Japan who are shocked because back in 19, I don't know, 60, they watched a sailor come to Japan and not know how to use chopsticks. And now in 2024, they watched a gaijin pick up chopsticks and know how to use them perfectly. This is a generation that probably doesn't even really use the internet very much. And probably the only outside source of information they get is Japanese TV, which mostly just sticks to topics only about Japan. Even when there's like an international crisis or something like that, they mostly talk about it to let you know no Japanese people died in it. This isn't such a big deal. I don't know why anybody gets that upset about it. Have you not had a grandma or grandfather say something that's these days maybe not so PC, or like maybe these days you'd be like, yes, grandma, everybody knows that now because we have the internet and it's like a mobile library with us all the time. And it's not them being mean, it's not them being stupid, it's not them being angry at you. It's just from another time. And to take offense to that, I think you're really reaching. I think you're really looking to be angry. And I think this also comes from just the frustrations of some of the emotions that latch on to you while you're living in Japan long term. You do get a sense of loneliness. Yeah, you're not going to make any really super long term foreigner friends because most of them go home. Most, I'm saying. I still have some that live there, and we're still friends to this day. I could say at least there's two or three that I have that still live there, and we're still good friends to this day. But that took a long time to find those three people in the 15, 16 years almost going on there now that I've lived in Japan. It is hard to make long term connections with Japanese friends. And this is, again, not the fault of the Japanese and not the fault of you, the foreigner, either. If you are raised into totally different traditions with all sorts of cultural implications that you're not even thinking of. For example, you make a joke about a childhood cartoon that you thought was funny. There's probably no chance that that Japanese person grew up with the same set of cartoons or even understands the joke that is a reference to the cartoon that you grew up with. Now, this is a very, very minor thing that is different, but these minor things are tiny little bits that add up into one big, very cultural difference that doesn't let you connect on as many levels. This is going to be the same for almost any country, especially those that don't have a lot of Western influence, such as Japan, okay? Of course, there's globalization everywhere. Of course, Japan has things like McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, Kentucky Fried Chicken, all sorts of Western American restaurants, stores, brands. That doesn't mean that those people were raised by it. Those are like small treats for them here and there. McDonald's fast food is not an everyday life sort of thing for Japanese people. They consider that kind of a cheat meal because mostly they're eating rice and vegetables and stuff like that. And that's another just small cultural difference. Food, even food is very different. The number one question I always get asked is, I don't like fish. Should I move to Japan? No, you probably shouldn't. Okay. Maybe if you're like, I don't like fish, I'm like vegetarian or vegan, probably you'd still be okay to go to Japan. Um, but I don't know why you'd be telling me you don't like fish because actually that'd be wouldn't that be pescatarian if you ate fish and no other meat? But if there's certain things you don't like, you probably could be okay in Japan. But you also shouldn't be there complaining about the things the Japanese people like. That always blew my mind was when people would complain about things Japanese people do that they're like, well, my country does this. And it's like, well, that's because it's your country. Now, there are certain aspects of Japan that I feel like hold the country back because they refuse to advance. For example, psychiatry, psychology, you know, forms of medicine like that and things that Japan still has like a lot of stuff to catch up with where they didn't even believe ADD or ADHD or depression were a big deal until like the early 2000s. They were like, I guess that's real. Okay, I guess that's real. Maybe we can start to let doctors give medicine for that. But, you know, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Am I right, Japan? Like that's kind of they still kind of handle it that way. They've admitted that those like psychological situations do exist, but they're still kind of like, yeah, but I mean, do you really need medication for that? um, that's not really something that's a cultural conflict that'll come into being a problem for you. Although I have heard from friends who took medication that was for psychological, psychiatric things that they had been ostracized for doing that in public. So my advice to you is if you do have medications or anything you take it in private. This is what the Japanese people do too. So Do you have to conform to every Japanese rule? No, you're a foreigner. You have your own quirks and ticks that make you very different. And often, Japanese people are very happy to see those. They want to see something different. They want to know someone different. They want to learn about somebody different. But at the same time, realize those might also be cultural things that never let you truly connect on a level that you would be able to connect with someone you grew up in the same country with. I'm sure any foreigner traveling anywhere in the world, staying there for a long time, would eventually run into this same feeling on certain aspects of their life. The other big one, and I used to see this happen a lot, people who had been there for a long time being super angry, and maybe I could even put myself in this category. They come to Japan and become, I don't know if I want to say frustrated, but they become angry because they can't work their dream job. There's a lot of people who finish college and come straight to Japan because they can get their first teaching job doing that. You got the college degree, that's pretty much all you need. You can have the degree in anything. And they're like, you know what? I'm going to use this teaching as a foothold that's going to let me get into the industry I want to be doing while I'm in Japan. So not only am I going to be able to use my degree to get into my dream job, but I'm going to be doing it internationally. Think of that, people back home. That almost never works. Unless you come to the country speaking fluent Japanese, you're probably not going to get into the industry of your dreams. Um, I've told the story of the manga artist who wanted to come there and got his chance to work the apprenticeship and was floored by the fact that he might have to work anywhere from 20 to 22 hours to prove to his senpai that he was worthy of this apprenticeship. And he failed. He just was like, this is insane. Why should I have to do this? And it's like, well, all the Japanese people before you did it, and just because you're a foreigner doesn't mean you get to skip that. You can't be angry at the country for having their set limits and challenges and tests to put you into something you were lucky enough to get into. And this person couldn't even speak Japanese, so getting a chance to draw that and prove themselves to a senpai and get into the industry is like completely looking the gift horse in the mouth by complaining about the hours. I have to work too many hours. Yeah, that's a lot of hours. That's stupid, a lot of hours. That's insane. Well, guess what? Everybody else before you did it, and they got in there. They're not working it forever that long, but they're proving themselves. Apprenticeships in Japan are a challenge to try and weed out the weak ones. I've heard many stories of people who finally got a chance to put their foot in the door and get in there, and they couldn't hack it. And I've seen some who have, and those are the ones speaking fluent Japanese, probably have now made like very tight relationships with those that they work with in Japan, have learned to speak perfectly and fluently, have worked their way up to the top in their industry and stuff like that, and sometimes even get gigs on TV and stuff because there's such a rarity in Japan. But for every one of those stories, there's thousands that failed. The goofiest one I remember reading, and this was like pretty far back. I want to say this is like 10 years back or so. This is pretty far back. There was an article about a guy who said he was trapped in Japan. And his excuse for why he was saying that he was trapped in Japan, and I believe this was in Kanzai-zine, which is like a local rag for Osaka's Kansai prefecture. And it just talks about different foreigner activities going on there. It's one of the few English print magazines. It's free to pick up. I think they're still in print. You could go get it there. This guy was interviewed about how he is forever trapped in Japan because he married his Japanese girlfriend. They had a kid. She did not want to leave to go back to the UK, where he had majored in feminism and psychology. And now he was pissed off that he wasn't able to find a job that used his degree in feminism and psychology in Japan. What? What job did you think you were going to come over to Japan? He never ever states an actual job in the article. He never says, like, the job I wanted to work was this. He said, I remember this guy saying that he wanted to lead protests against political corruption and gather unions to help for better work conditions in Japan. He spoke no Japanese. He had no Japanese friends. He had no Japanese connections coming over. His only outlet in the world is his Japanese wife and the kid that they had just had. And now he said, I'm forever trapped in Japan because I've got to work here to support my family, and I'll never ever get to use that degree. And that really just makes me feel trapped and depressed. And what? Like, how, did you research anything before you came over? I mean, this wasn't early 2000s Japan where there wasn't a lot on the internet yet. This was about, I don't know, 2012, 2014. And this guy was shocked that he was unable to use these degrees here. Um, Number one, a bachelor's degree in psychology, it's hard to use that even in your home country of the UK or America or Canada. To get a job using that is difficult. On top of it, feminism, can someone name me a job that a degree in feminism gets you? Hey, I'm not like anti-feminist or anything like that. I don't care. Like, I'm not here to, but I just don't know what degree you would get. I mean, I have friends who majored in archaeology and paleontology, and they don't work jobs in that either because those don't really have jobs that are connected to it. And if you did get an archaeology or paleontology degree and try to come to Japan and find a job in it, that probably wouldn't work out either. There's just some degrees that are never going to be met with a job in Japan if you're a foreigner, because why would they hire an outside source to do that? Why should they hire a foreigner to do it? Now, there's certain things, of course, that make total sense. Like if you were an English lit major and you wanted to come to Japan and do localization, which means translate video games into English and make sure the grammar and everything was proper like that. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. That's something you could easily get yourself into. If you were like an awesome programmer, and the programming languages, as long as you know how to program really, really good, and you could speak minimal Japanese, you probably could get a job if you were like a sick programmer. There's a lot of video game companies that would probably hire you if you could prove to them what you could do. That's probably true though for any foreign company that needs a lot of people into programming. That's its own language within itself. That's kind of international in a way. But there's just other degrees, I'm sorry, they're just not going to get you anything. Like, I mean, even myself, like I said, I want to put myself in these categories. I have an art degree, right? Competing with artists in Japan, it's just not, they're just way higher quality. The people who make it to the top, who are in manga and in anime, blow most of the artists here in America out of the water, especially with our stupid bullshit performance artists and like garbage hanging a banana, taping a banana to the wall and calling it art and stuff like that sometimes. I don't think I could ever illustrate or have the patience to illustrate on the level in which they do or pump out manga as fast as they do. And that's not on them, that's on me. That's just my background. I knew quite well going to Japan I probably was not going to be able to use my art degree to get any kind of job. I was content with just teaching English, but there's many people who have bigger dreams and then they come to Japan and then they start getting into the whole life of long-term living there. It's easy to get one work visa after another for a part-time or full-time English teaching gig that has a degree attached to it. And again, like I said, you can have any degree to get that English teaching gig. And it doesn't have to be in English or anything like that. And you can get that job very easily. That's how you get your visa approved. They look that you're actually a college graduate. Okay, they can bring something to our country that lets them teach. And look, you know what? I mean, I'm not saying you need to have a college degree. I think honestly anybody could come to Japan and teach English. It's not that hard. The English that you're teaching is like the most basic of basic English. But Japan requires the degree. So, I met many people who they were married to a Japanese national and they didn't have any degree and they still had the same job I had because it's an easy job to do. Is it rewarding? Not really so much. Does it feel like it's advancing your career into something that may become a long-term life encompassing career? No. That's the thing. If you come to Japan to be an English teacher, that's all you're ever going to be. Maybe you might end up being the manager of an English teaching school, in which you probably still teach classes of your own, but then you also check out some of the classes the other teachers are teaching to make sure they're not garbage, right? That's about it. That's like the highest I've ever seen anybody climb in the English industry. Most times, the people at the top, the executives, the CEOs, the COOs, the high level admin and stuff like that, they're all going to be Japanese people, of course. I mean, they're the ones that started the company. I haven't seen many gaijin climb to the top of a lot of industries in Japan. And the reason for that is the same reason it is in almost every other country. I mean, it's hard. It's difficult. Number one, it's just difficult even for the Japanese themselves to climb the corporate ladder. But number two, of course, it's double hard when there's mostly just an indigenous group of people that have been in the country for a very long time and have had a sort of anti-immigration going on for a very long time. But Japan is very anti-immigrant. I'm not gonna, you know, sugarcoat it and tell you they'd love to have new races come and live in Japan. They're not interested in that. Go look up the number of asylum seekers who are allowed to find and seek asylum in other countries and compare it to Japan, and you'll be blown away. Go look at how many asylum seekers America took in last year, and then look at how many Japan took in. It's going to be something like 30,000 to 1 or 2, maybe, if they're super lucky. You know, look at immigration stats for Japan versus America, or really almost any other country in the world. You'll be shocked at how low Japan keeps it. And I don't know. Some people love that about Japan. They love that everything gets kept very Japanesey and traditional and, you know, culturally sound. And other people are extremely angry about it and call it racist and stuff like that. I'm just here to give you the facts of what I know from living there 15 years. I'm not here to make a call on that. I do feel at times some of their restrictions are overly harsh. But that's as far as I'll comment on that. Um, so the last part of this that I kind of want to end the video on saying this is the worst type of person who ends up hating living in Japan, who ends up angry that they live in Japan but says that they're trapped and they're stuck there, oftentimes has started a family life like me. I mean, I'm one of those people that's done that. Did that trap me in Japan? No. Luckily, I had a supportive wife who was more than fine with me bringing my son over here so that he could learn Western style learning and English perfectly and stuff like that. But there's a lot of families that once they move to Japan, the Japanese side of the family isn't interested in ever leaving the country, which I can completely understand. If you've lived there all your life and someone else comes from overseas and you marry them, you expect them to join in with your culture more than you to have to go back to their land to live. So I don't see that being a big problem. I don't see that. At the same time, I think people should have deeper conversations before they get married and consider themselves trapped in Japan. When I hear people say stuff like that, it's like, so you never discussed with your spouse that maybe one day you'd want to move back? It seems short-sighted on your part. The other thing I see is just people frustrated with the fact that they can't use the degree that they earned in Japan, which, once again, did you research the percentage of foreign hires that company you're interested in getting hired for takes on? Research stuff like that before you go, before you start blaming the country for something that's been a tradition or a cultural way of life for them for sometimes hundreds of years. Like, chill out and do some research first. Realize that coming to Japan because you're excited about it, because you've always wanted to go to Japan, because you've always loved Japanese culture, doesn't mean Japanese culture is always going to love you back. I think that is the biggest thing. You may come to Japan super excited, super happy to go there, know so much about the culture, learned a ton about their traditions, watched a bunch of Japanese movies, TV shows, manga, anime, and nobody cares there because it's been their life their whole life. You know, if someone came over to America and told you how excited about all these things that you've lived with in America for ages were to them, you'd just be like, oh, okay, that's cool, whatever. Like, because you've experienced them your whole life. And sometimes people are shocked when they come to Japan and tell or try to connect with Japanese people over things that they've just found normal, common, everyday things in their life. And there's no connection made because the Japanese people are just like, all right, that's great, you're excited about that, but big deal. Like, okay, that's been on my TV forever. That's been a movie we knew back in the 1980s. Great that you happened to see that. For I remember so many friends and I, when we came over, when Japanese people would ask us, "Have you ever seen an anime?" and we'd say, "Yeah," and they'd be like, "What's your favorite anime movie?" or something like that. We'd all say like Akira. That was super huge back in the 90s when anime first started to like bust on the scene in America. Akira is not a popular movie in Japan. Nobody cares about it. Like they'll be like Akira, and they're like, that's just like a boy's name. Because I mean, it's a common Japanese name in Japan. I'm like, luckily, I'd seen other movies that the guy had made, the creator of that film, like Freedom. I think there was another one called Metropolis, and I'd name those two movies. I'd be like, the same guy who made Freedom and Metropolis. They'd be like, oh yeah, okay, Freedom with like the cup noodles and stuff. Yeah, that's the movie. Oh yeah, he did make Akira too, didn't he? Yeah, I guess we saw that like back in the early 80s. And they're just like, why are you talking about that now in the year 2000? Who cares? Like, you know, people come over and they talk about how they're excited about Naruto or Dragon Ball Z or Bleach, and people in Japan are just like, that's so old. Who cares? Like, it's like telling someone you're excited about Garfield or Snoopy in America. They'd be like, okay, cool. Like that's been in America for a long time. That's cool, man. All right, whatever. And that ends up making people feel lonely, or that like they've missed the point of connection from the things that they like. And it's not that at all. It's that you need to go deeper than what you knew back when you lived abroad from Japan. You need to go back to what you knew and go beyond it and learn new aspects of Japan that are up and coming, that are futuristic, that are political, that are cultural, that are traditional in more senses than just what you've been exposed to in your own country, because there's so much more to it. And then maybe you will make deeper connections. You shouldn't come to Japan to pursue the career that you majored in unless it was something you knew you already had a hookup to connect to when you came to Japan. Like if you were already offered a job, like there was a recruiter out of Japan at your college saying, come on over, we got this great, then I could understand. But I would never give anybody the advice of, yeah, major in whatever you want to and then try to find that job in Japan, because I'd say 99% of the time you're probably not going to get it, unless, like I said, it's like English literature or something like that. And then also, my last bit of advice is just don't blame that on the Japanese. That's not their fault. If you feel trapped, if you set yourself up for failure, if you didn't make any deeper connections, if you didn't connect closer to Japanese culture or tradition, if you didn't make any long-term friends, well, that's not the Japanese people trying to sabotage you. That's the difficulties of living overseas that can happen in any country. That is the traditions and culture that Japanese people were raised on and you yourself were raised on, making a great divide. Not a divide that's malicious or angry or racist or bigoted or anything like that. It's just what happens growing up. And number three, don't say that you're trapped in Japan because you can't get the job of your dreams. Especially those who've like married Japanese people and like had kids and they consider themselves trapped. I feel like that's so mean to try and blame it on Japan. Because that means like you're also kind of blaming it on your family too. You married someone who you couldn't compromise with to come back to your country. Why did you do that if that was your future plans? You went to a country where there was a big possibility your job would not exist. Why did you move to that country? You majored in something that wasn't popular even in your own country. Why did you think you would come to Japan and find it out being more popular there? It doesn't make any sense. Just, put a lot more research in before you come. Don't end up being one of the people who says that they're trapped in a place that they hate, that they're trapped in Japan. I feel like anybody I've ever heard say that, it's kind of like you did it to yourself. You did it to yourself. You know, take baby steps with a lot of these big life movements that you're making. Don't jump into things right away. Making a move to another country is a big step in your life. It's a big change. Getting married is a really big step in your life. Don't make small make small steps with that and don't suddenly leap into it. Having a kid, starting a family, even more massive. And I guess it's the people I've just seen like jump into this way too quick and expect everything to work out that end up hating living in Japan, or like angry at Japanese people for nothing that they've done. Just hating it because they've set themselves up for, I don't know if I want to say failure, but I want to say maybe an uncomfortable way of life, or a lonely way of life, or a way of life that they never envisioned for their own future. Anyway, that's my little tidbit on people who end up living in Japan, hating it, or feeling trapped. I'd love to hear your comments below on this. Have you ever seen this on YouTube before, where someone's talked about feeling trapped in Japan or hating Japan while living there? Have you heard of foreigners going there and dealing with this? Have you had a friend or family member talk about this happening? Let me know in the comments below. Until next time, I've been Unrested, and I hope you have a great rest of the day.